My name is Lorelai Bennett, and 6 months ago, at age 32, I heard the words that shattered my world. You're the biggest disgrace to this family, my father announced, at what was supposed to be my promotion celebration dinner. What happened next changed everything. Today, not a single member of my once picture-perfect family is speaking to each other, and it all traces back to what I discovered and what I decided to do about it. Before I dive into how my family's perfect facade came crashing down, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that like button and subscribe to join our family of truth seekers. Trust me, if there's one thing this story will show you, it's that blood loyalty only matters when it's earned. Now let's rewind to understand how we got here. Growing up as the middle child in the Bennett family meant living in a world of impossible expectations. Our sprawling colonial in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood stood as a monument to success, much like the carefully crafted image my parents had built over decades. My father, Richard Bennett, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon whose patients included celebrities and politicians. My mother, Victoria, ruled the social scene as chair of multiple charity boards, her calendar perpetually filled with galas and fundraisers. My older brother, James, followed the expected path, graduating from Harvard Law and quickly establishing himself at a prestigious firm. My younger sister, Olivia, had leveraged her natural beauty and our family name to become a lifestyle influencer with millions of followers who adored her seemingly effortless perfection. Then there was me, the responsible, diligent middle child who never quite fit the Bennett mold. While I dutifully attended Wellesley College as expected, I had veered off script by pursuing museum studies instead of medicine or law. My passion for historical artifacts and preservation was viewed as a quaint hobby by my family, certainly not a real career with the prestige they demanded. Darling, wouldn't you be happier in something more substantial? My mother would ask, her perfectly manicured hand resting on mine. Your father could make a call to Boston General about their administrative positions. Those museum stipends can barely cover a decent wardrobe. I'd smile and deflect, having learned early that direct confrontation led nowhere with my family. Instead, I channeled my energy into my work at the Museum of Fine Arts, starting as a research assistant and slowly climbing the ranks through merit rather than connections, a foreign concept in the Bennett household. Family dinners were exercises in emotional gymnastics. My father would dominate conversations with tales of his surgical triumphs, while my mother orchestrated the social choreography. James would boast about his latest high-profile client, and Olivia would casually mention her growing endorsement deals. When my turn came, I'd learned to keep my professional accomplishments brief, watching eyes glaze over when I spoke passionately about a newly authenticated artifact or a successful exhibition. The unspoken family hierarchy was clear. My achievements existed in a different, lesser category. The subtle dismissals stung, but I'd grown accustomed to the emotional taxation of being a Bennett. Love in our family came with conditions, achievements, appearances, and adherence to the family brand. The Bennett name opens doors, my father would remind us, but it also means responsibility. People are watching. Excellence isn't optional, it's expected. Despite everything, when I received news of my promotion to Senior Curator of American Artifacts, I felt a flutter of hope. This wasn't just any position, it was prestigious, competitive, and came with significant influence in the museum world. For once, I had achieved something that even by Bennett standards qualified as exceptional. I spent hours crafting the perfect announcement, rehearsing how I'd share the news at our monthly family dinner. Perhaps this would be the moment they'd see me, really see me as worthy of the Bennett legacy. I selected my outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit that projected authority while remaining appropriately conservative for my parents' taste. I even scheduled an appointment at my mother's preferred salon, submitting to a styling that cost half my weekly salary. The night before the dinner, I called my cousin Emma, the only relative who seemed to understand the complex dynamics of our family. "They'll be proud, Lori," she reassured me. "This is a big deal. Even Victoria can't dismiss the Met." "I hope so," I replied, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my suit as it hung in preparation. Maybe this will finally be enough. As I prepared to leave for my parents' home that fateful evening, I took a final glance in the mirror. The woman looking back appeared every inch a Bennett success story. I allowed myself a moment of genuine pride, untarnished by my family's judgment. I had earned this position through hard work, expertise, and perseverance. Whatever happened at dinner, no one could take that away from me. Little did I know that this dinner wouldn't be about my achievement at all. It would instead become the night that exposed the rot beneath our family's perfect veneer and set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy the carefully constructed reality of the Bennett family legacy. The evening began like countless Bennett family gatherings before it. My parents' home gleamed with old money elegance crystal chandeliers, reflected in polished silver fresh flowers, arranged with military precision, and the subtle scent of my mother's signature candles perfuming the air. Our longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, greeted me with a warm smile that contrasted sharply with my mother's air-kiss hello. "Lorelei, darling, you're looking well," my mother said, her eyes conducting their usual rapid assessment. Though perhaps a touch too professional for a family dinner, no matter. "Everyone's in the sitting room for cocktails." I followed her through the familiar hallway, lined with family portraits, generations of Bennetts looking down with the same confident expression my father had perfected. The sitting room hummed with conversation that paused briefly as I entered. "The woman of the hour," my father announced, raising his scotch in a gesture that fell short of celebratory. James was just telling us about his new partnership track, and just like that, my moment was sidelined. I accepted a glass of wine from Mrs. Chen and settled into my usual spot on the periphery of the conversation. James dominated the discussion with details of his latest corporate acquisition case. My mother interjecting with names of board members she knew personally, my father offering strategic suggestions. Olivia scrolled through her phone occasionally, flashing the screen to show a celebrity who had commented on her latest post. When the conversation finally lulled, I took a deep breath. "I actually have some news to share tonight as well." Oh, my mother perked up. "Did you finally agree to a date with Dr. Whitman's son? He's been appointed to the hospital board, you know." "No, it's professional news," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I've been promoted to senior curator of American artifacts at the museum." The momentary silence felt heavier than it should have. "Well, that's lovely, dear," my mother finally offered. "Though it's a shame about all that education, just to look after old things." "It's actually quite competitive," I countered, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. "The position usually goes to someone with at least 15 more years of experience. Connections matter in these institutions," my father said dismissively. "I'm sure the donations we've made to the museum's endowment didn't hurt your chances." The sting was familiar, but still sharp. "Actually, Dad, the selection committee didn't know about our family connection. I asked the board to recuse anyone who might have a conflict of interest." My brother laughed. "Only you would turn down a perfectly good advantage, Lori." Dinner proceeded with the usual choreographed elegance, but I sensed an undercurrent of tension. As Mrs. Chen served the main course, my father cleared his throat, a signal we all recognized as preceding an important announcement. "Before we celebrate Lorelei's career advancement," he began, "there's a family matter we need to address." He turned to me, his expression hardening. "James needs a particular artifact authenticated for a client. A significant client. We mentioned it would be a simple matter for you to expedite." I frowned. "I don't remember discussing this." "Your mother spoke with you last month about a Greek amphora," he continued impatiently. The conversation came back to me a vague request I'd politely deflected because it sounded ethically questionable. Mom mentioned something in passing, but I explained that authentication requires proper channels and provenance documentation. There's a waiting list, and every piece must follow protocol. My father's jaw tightened. This is exactly the problem with you, Lorelai. Family comes first always. James needs this for the Anderson acquisition. Surely you understand what's at stake. I understand that you're asking me to compromise my professional ethics, I replied, feeling a rare surge of courage. The museum has strict policies about authentication, especially for items with questionable provenance. Questionable, James interjected. It's been in the Anderson family for generations. Then they should have proper documentation, I countered. And if they do, they can submit it through official channels like everyone else. My father set down his fork with deliberate calm. This is precisely why you've always been a disappointment. You have access to power and refuse to use it for your family's benefit. Richard, my mother murmured, glancing nervously at Mrs. Chen, who was discreetly exiting the dining room. No, Victoria, it's time someone said it. My father's voice rose. Your sister leverages her connections. Your brother understands family loyalty. But you hide behind ethics and protocols while refusing to help the people who gave you everything. Gave me everything. The words escaped before I could temper them. I worked for my position. I earned it. With the education, we paid for the connections. We provided the name you carry, my father countered. And the first time we ask for something in return, something simple, you refuse. It's not simple. It's potentially illegal. The table fell silent. My father's face darkened to a dangerous shade of red. You're the biggest disgrace to this family, he said, each word precision aimed to wound. We've built a legacy of success through mutual support and loyalty, and you spit on it with your self-righteous morality. The dam broke. Years of accumulated resentments poured forth from every direction. Do you know how embarrassing it is explaining what you do? My mother's voice quavered. Everyone asks why you couldn't have gone into medicine or married appropriately. Remember when you refused to help me with my college application essay? Olivia chimed in. My friends' sisters all wrote their siblings' essays. Or when Anderson's son needed an internship, James added. One word from you to the museum director would have secured it. Now I'm scrambling to save this acquisition because you won't authenticate one simple artifact. It's not just one artifact, I said, realization dawning. How many pieces have you asked me to help with over the years? How many times have you used my position? The momentary silence confirmed my suspicion. You've been using me as your authentication back channel. I whispered the full picture, becoming horrifyingly clear. Those casual questions about provenance, the hypothetical scenarios. You've been running questionable artifacts through me to establish legitimacy. Don't be melodramatic, my mother scoffed. We simply asked for professional courtesies. What families do. No, I pushed back my chair. What criminals do. What people who trade in potentially stolen cultural artifacts do. That's enough. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the crystal. You either help your brother with this authentication, or you can consider yourself cut off from this family. Financially, socially, completely. I looked around the table at these people I'd spent my life trying to please. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. My sister examined her manicure. My mother dabbed at non-existent tears. I need some air, I managed, rising from the table on unsteady legs. No one followed me as I collected my coat and purse. No one called after me as I stepped into the cool evening air. The Bennett family had made their position clear, and for the first time I was seeing them with absolute clarity in return. The week following, the dinner passed in a blur of emotional whiplash. I threw myself into work, grateful for the structured environment and clear ethical guidelines that stood in stark contrast to my family's moral flexibility. My phone remained silent, no calls from my mother to smooth things over, no texts from Olivia with passive-aggressive memes, no emails from James with legal reminders of family loyalty. The silence was both wounding and strangely liberating. For the first time, I wasn't expending energy managing the Bennett expectations. Still, 3 decades of conditioning left me checking my phone compulsively, waiting for the inevitable reconciliation attempt. It came 10 days later, a terse email from my mother reminding me that I was expected to deliver the family photo albums I'd borrowed for digitizing. Her upcoming 60th birthday celebration planning was underway, and she needed them for the video montage. The message ended with a pointed reminder that family disagreements shouldn't interfere with obligations. I'd almost forgotten the album's 5 leather-bound collections, spanning the Bennett family history that I'd borrowed months earlier, with the genuine intention of preserving them digitally. They'd sat untouched in my hall closet, yet another family project I'd volunteered for that no one else valued. That evening, I pulled them out, determined to complete at least this obligation before deciding how to proceed with my family. As I flipped through the carefully curated images of Bennett's success graduations, awards vacations to exclusive locations, I noticed something odd tucked into the binding of the most recent album and envelope. Inside was a bank statement addressed to my father at his office, rather than our family home. Curiosity overcame propriety, and I examined the document expecting nothing significant. Instead, I found a series of large transfers to an offshore account with a balance far below what my father's surgical practice should have maintained. This discovery might have remained an isolated curiosity had I not found similar documents hidden throughout the albums, bank statements, investment reports, and legal correspondence, all carefully concealed within the family record. No one but me had touched in years. As I organized the documents chronologically across my living room floor, a troubling narrative emerged. My father's medical practice had been losing prominent patients for years, following a series of questionable outcomes. The malpractice insurance payments listed far exceeded what he'd ever acknowledged. More disturbing were references to procedures that seemed unnecessary or experimental performed on patients from overseas who would have difficulty pursuing legal action in American courts. A separate folder contained information about James's legal practice. While outwardly successful, the documents suggested he was deeply involved in facilitating questionable international business acquisitions, particularly for art collectors and private museums, with notorious reputations for dealing in antiquities from conflict zones. Most surprising were the documents related to Olivia. Her influencer empire, which she claimed earned her 7 figures annually, was apparently built on fabricated engagement metrics and fake sponsorship deals. Several cease and desist letters from brands she'd falsely claimed as sponsors were tucked between family vacation photos. The most immediately concerning discovery was evidence that my parents had been secretly selling family heirlooms, pieces I'd been told were in storage or being repaired to maintain their lavish lifestyle as my father's income dwindled. These weren't just any heirlooms, but items of significant historical value, including several pieces that had been promised to museums in the Bennett family will. As the night deepened, I sat surrounded by evidence of my family's elaborate deception, feeling as though I'd awakened in someone else's life. The perfect Bennetts, the family that had made me feel perpetually inadequate, were frauds. The moral superiority they'd wielded against me was a facade hiding breathtaking hypocrisy. My phone chimed with a text from my mother. "Don't forget the albums for tomorrow's lunch, and wear something appropriate. The Whitmans will be joining us." The casual demand ignited something in me, a slow-burning anger I'd suppressed for decades. They expected me to return to the fold, as though nothing had happened to continue playing my assigned role while they carried on with their deceptions. For a brief dark moment, I imagined exposing them publicly, sending evidence to licensing boards, clients, and social media. The fantasy of revenge felt intoxicatingly powerful after years of powerlessness. But revenge wasn't what I wanted. What I needed was verification. If I was going to confront the truth about my family, I needed to be absolutely certain. Some documents could be misleading without context. Some situations might have explanations I hadn't considered. I carefully organized everything back into folders, made copies, and secured the originals in my safe. Then, I did what I'd been trained to do as a curator. I developed a methodical research plan to authenticate the provenance of each document and claim before taking any further action. The Bennetts had raised me to believe that excellence wasn't optional, but they'd never anticipated I might apply those standards to investigating them. As I finally fell into an exhausted sleep near dawn, one thought provided surprising comfort. For once, my professional skills were perfectly aligned with my personal needs. I didn't yet know what actions I would ultimately take, but I knew with absolute certainty that the Bennett family would never be the same once I uncovered the full truth. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my professional career. With my mother expecting me for lunch, I sent a brief message claiming a migraine, a condition she couldn't dispute since she frequently used the same excuse to escape unwanted social obligations. Instead of returning the albums as demanded, I began a methodical investigation into my family's activities. As a curator, I developed precise skills for authentication and provenance research. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now applying these professionally honed abilities to expose my own family's deceptions. First, I created a secure digital database to organize my findings. Each family member received a separate file where I tracked suspicious activities, supporting evidence and verification sources. This wasn't an emotional vendetta, but a scholarly pursuit of truth, and I approached it with the same rigor I would apply to authenticating a questionable artifact. My father's file grew most quickly. Using public medical board records, court databases, and carefully worded conversations with former colleagues, I pieced together a disturbing pattern. Richard Bennett's celebrated surgeon had been performing unnecessary procedures on wealthy international patients for years. One former nurse who had left the practice abruptly, hesitantly confirmed my suspicions over coffee. "I always wondered if someone would eventually look into it," she said, eyes darting nervously around the cafe. The Saudi patients, the Chinese businessmen, they'd come with minor issues and somehow always need complex procedures. When I raised concerns about a particular case, I was reassigned the next day. She provided names and dates that matched perfectly with the suspicious bank transfers I'd discovered. Further investigation revealed my father had been removed from 3 hospital affiliations in the past decade, information he'd successfully suppressed through legal threats and strategic donations. James's legal improprieties were more challenging to verify given attorney-client privilege, but his financial records told their own story. His lifestyle far exceeded his legitimate income, with properties and investments channeled through a complex web of shell companies. Through careful analysis of public records and corporate filings, I traced connections between his clients and several high-profile cases of antiquities trafficking. The Anderson family, whose authentication request had triggered our family confrontation, had been investigated twice by Interpol for possessing looted artifacts. Olivia's deception was simultaneously the most public and the easiest to document. Behind her carefully curated image of success lay a mountain of debt and fraudulent business practices. Several brands she claimed as sponsors confirmed they had no relationship with her and a digital marketing expert. I consulted verified that her engagement metrics showed clear signs of purchased followers and commented interactions. About 60% of her engagement is bot-generated, he explained, showing me telltale patterns in the data. And these sponsored posts for luxury vacations. The hotels have no record of her staying there. She's just reposting stock photos with filters. The most disturbing discovery came when I investigated my parents' art and antique sales. Cross-referencing items from our family collection with auction records, I identified 23 significant pieces that had been sold through discrete channels over the past 5 years. 3 of these items had been specifically designated for museum donation in my grandparents' will, a legally binding provision my parents had simply ignored. Each revelation deepened my understanding of the impossible position I'd been placed in. My promotion, far from being the achievement I'd thought represented something far more valuable to my family: higher-level access to authentication processes and museum acquisition decisions. Their disappointment in my ethical boundaries wasn't about family loyalty, but about my refusal to facilitate their increasingly desperate schemes. "I always found your family a bit excessive," said Dr. Reynolds, my father's former colleague, when I cautiously inquired about the practice's reputation. "But the changes in Richard these past few years have been concerning. The procedures he's willing to perform, the patients he takes. It's not the doctor I once knew." Around day 10 of my investigation, I received an unexpected call from Aunt Philippa, my mother's older sister, who had been ostracized from family gatherings for years due to unnamed disloyalties. "Lorelei, I heard there might be some tension between you and your parents," she began cautiously. Our conversation lasted 3 hours. Aunt Philippa, it turned out, had been excluded for questioning my father's medical ethics years earlier, after he performed an unnecessary surgery on her husband. The family narrative that she was jealous of my mother's social standing was entirely fabricated. "They've been like this for decades," she explained. "The Bennett success story requires absolute loyalty and silence. Anyone who questions it becomes an enemy." She connected me with cousins and family friends who shared similar experiences of manipulation and exclusion. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, revealing a generational pattern of ethical compromises justified as family loyalty. As my investigation neared the 2-week mark, my mother's messages became increasingly demanding. The family was concerned about my emotional state. My father needed to discuss my professional future. James had important client matters requiring my urgent attention. The pressure tactics were familiar, but now I recognized them for what they were: manipulation designed to force compliance. The Bennett family operated like a closed system where questioning the official narrative was the only unforgivable sin. On the 15th day, I received an email from the museum's ethics committee requesting my presence at an urgent meeting. Someone, it wasn't difficult to guess who had raised concerns about my objectivity in authentication matters. My family was sending a clear message about the consequences of defiance. That evening, as I reviewed my comprehensive files on each family member, I found myself at a crossroads. I had gathered enough evidence to potentially trigger investigations into each of them. I could destroy the carefully constructed Bennett legacy with a few strategic communications. The power I had never sought was suddenly in my hands. But what would justice look like? Public humiliation, legal consequences, family implosion. For all their failings, these were still the people who had shaped me, who featured in my earliest memories, who were irrevocably part of my identity. I decided to give them one final opportunity to choose a different path. I would present the evidence directly to them, not as a threat, but as a reality check. Perhaps faced with the extent of my knowledge, they would recognize the unsustainability of their deceptions. The decision made, I crafted careful invitations to a family meeting at my apartment. "I've had time to reflect on our family values and legacy," I wrote. "I'd like to share some important discoveries before making any irreversible decisions." Their responses came quickly relieved, acceptances wrapped in condescending assumptions about my return to reason. Little did they know that reason was precisely what had led me to this moment of clarity about who the Bennetts truly were and what they had forced me to become. So, what would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted your family with the evidence or gone straight to the authorities? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this family drama, be sure to hit that like button to help more people discover this story. Now let's see what happened when my family walked into my carefully laid trap. My apartment had never hosted a full Bennett family gathering before. My modest two-bedroom in Cambridge lacked the grandeur my parents considered essential for proper entertaining. Yet on this particular evening, the space served my purposes perfectly neutral territory where I controlled the environment. I prepared meticulously. On my dining table, 4 identical folders were arranged precisely at each place setting. Each contained a carefully curated selection of documents relevant to its intended recipient, with tabs for easy reference. A digital recorder sat unobtrusively near my laptop, Massachusetts being a one-party consent state for recording conversations. My family arrived together, suggesting they had coordinated beforehand. My mother entered first, her gaze sweeping critically over my furnishings before offering her cheek for the expected kiss. "Darling, you're looking tired," she observed, her concern performative. "We've been so worried." My father followed his commanding presence, filling the modest space. "This situation has gone on long enough, Lorelei. It's time we put this unfortunate disagreement behind us." James and Olivia entered last, both radiating the particular brand of Bennett impatience reserved for inconvenient family obligations. "I have a client dinner at 8, James announced, checking his watch. "Let's make this quick. I've prepared some refreshments," I replied calmly, gesturing toward the dining area. "Please have a seat. Everything is arranged." They exchanged glances at my unusual formality, but complied, gravitating to the table where the folders awaited. My mother reached for hers immediately, always eager for prepared materials that might expedite social obligations. "What's all this?" she asked, flipping open the cover to reveal the first document, a sales receipt for my grandmother's Tiffany lamp collection items I'd been told were in storage for my future home. "Evidence," I said, simply taking my own seat. "I believe in making informed decisions, so I've spent the past 2 weeks compiling information about our family's activities. Each folder contains documentation relevant to its recipient." The atmosphere shifted instantly. My father's hand froze halfway to his folder. James straightened in his chair. Olivia's perpetual scroll through her phone halted mid-swipe. "This is highly inappropriate." My father began, his authoritative tone unable to mask the new tension in his voice. "If this is some sort of emotional reaction to our dinner conversation, it's a factual response," I corrected, opening my own folder, which contained duplicates of all their materials. For instance, "Dad, would you like to explain why you've performed 16 questionable surgeries on foreign nationals in the past year alone? The procedures seem medically unnecessary, according to the second opinions these patients later sought." The color drained from my father's face. "You've been investigating me, your own father." "I've been investigating all of you," I clarified. "James, your folder contains documentation of your involvement in authenticating antiquities with questionable provenance through shell companies. There's a particularly interesting paper trail connecting you to the Anderson Collection's artifacts from conflict zones." James slammed his folder shut. "This is a violation of attorney-client privilege. Actually, it's entirely based on public records and financial disclosures. I haven't accessed any privileged information." I turned to my sister. "Olivia, your section details your fraudulent sponsorship claims and purchased engagement metrics. The FTC takes a dim view of influencers who mislead consumers about paid endorsements." "You're insane," Olivia whispered, though her trembling hands betrayed her panic as she scanned the documents. "These were business misunderstandings, not fraud. Business misunderstandings that could result in significant legal penalties," I corrected. And Mother, your section documents the systematic liquidation of family heirlooms designated for museum donation in Grandma's will, a legally binding provision you've ignored. My mother's perfectly composed facade cracked. You don't understand the pressures of maintaining our position. Your father's practice had setbacks because he was performing unnecessary surgeries that resulted in complications. I finished for her. I know everything. The offshore accounts, the malpractice settlements kept quiet, the artifacts James has been helping clients acquire through questionable channels, all of it. A heavy silence fell over the dining table. For the first time in my life, I saw something I'd never witnessed in my family fear. "What do you want?" my father finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. "Money. A position somewhere." The question stung despite my preparation. Even now, they couldn't conceive that my motivation might be anything other than self-interest, the Bennett way. "I want you to understand what you've done," I replied. "Not just to others through your various schemes, but to our family. To me. You called me a disgrace for upholding ethical standards, while each of you has systematically violated professional, legal, and moral principles for years. We've done what was necessary to maintain the Bennett legacy," my father countered, finding his authoritative voice again. "You've benefited from that legacy your entire life." "A legacy built on fraud isn't worth preserving," I said quietly, "and I won't be complicit anymore." "So this is blackmail," James concluded, his legal mind assessing the situation. "You'll keep quiet if we meet certain demands." "No," I shook my head. "This is a courtesy notification. I'm giving you the opportunity to address these issues yourselves before I'm forced to take more formal action." "You wouldn't dare," my mother whispered. "We're your family." "Family doesn't use each other as pawns in illegal schemes," I countered. "Family doesn't emotionally manipulate and exclude members who refuse to comply with unethical demands. If you pursue this, you'll destroy everything my father warned, including yourself. Do you think your precious museum will keep you once they learn your family is under investigation? The Bennett name will become synonymous with scandal." "I've considered that possibility," I acknowledged. "But I've also discovered something interesting about identity in these past weeks. I am more than just a Bennett. I'm also a curator, a professional with principles, a person who can look in the mirror without flinching." Olivia suddenly burst into tears, genuine ones, not the camera-ready kind she deployed on social media. "You can't do this to me. My followers, my sponsors, I'll lose everything." For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. These people, for all their flaws, were still my family, the only one I'd ever known. "I'll give you 1 week," I said finally. 1 week to begin making amends. Dad needs to report himself to the medical board and cease performing unnecessary procedures. James needs to withdraw from representing clients with questionable antiquities. Olivia needs to issue corrections regarding her sponsorships. And the family heirlooms intended for museums need to be recovered or accounted for. "Impossible," my father declared. "You're asking us to destroy ourselves." "I'm asking you to take responsibility before the consequences become even more severe," I corrected. 1 week, and if we refuse, James asked the lawyer in him, needing to understand all options. I met his gaze steadily. "Then I'll be forced to share this information with the relevant authorities. Medical licensing boards, the Bar Association, the FTC, the FBI's art crime team." "You would choose strangers over your own blood?" my mother asked incredulously. "I'm choosing integrity," I replied. Something I thought the Bennett name stood for before I discovered the truth. My family exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them that excluded me as it always had. "You've left us no choice," my father said, rising from his chair. "If you insist on this self-righteous crusade, you are no longer welcome in this family. No further contact, no support, no acknowledgement. You will be completely cut off." The ultimatum designed to terrify a lifetime Bennett fell strangely flat. In their eyes, I could see they expected me to crumble, to beg forgiveness for my transgression, to return to the fold as the properly submissive daughter. Instead, I simply nodded. I understand. 1 week, they left in unified silence, presenting a united front, as they always did against external threats. Only now, for the first time, the threat was me. As the door closed behind them, I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by the evidence of decades of deception. The weight of what I'd done and what I still might have to do settled heavily on my shoulders. Yet beneath the sadness was something unexpected relief. The Bennett family mask had finally slipped, revealing the truth I'd always sensed but never wanted to acknowledge. And in that uncomfortable revelation was a strange kind of freedom. The week after the confrontation passed with glacial slowness. My phone remained silent aside from a single text from Olivia, "You're going to regret this." My email contained nothing from my family except an official letter from James's law firm warning of defamation consequences should I disseminate false information regarding the Bennett family. Their response told me everything I needed to know about their intentions. There would be no amends, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no course correction. The Bennetts would close ranks and fight as they always had when threatened. I had hoped for a different outcome, but I wasn't surprised. Hope and expectation were different things, a distinction I'd learned painfully over years of family disappointments. On the morning after my self-imposed deadline expired, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, open a cup of coffee growing cold beside it, and the carefully organized evidence folders arranged in a neat row. The moment felt monumental, a decisive break with everything I'd been raised to value and protect. I began with my father. The medical board received a detailed report documenting questionable procedures with patient names redacted, but dates and procedure codes included. Enough information to trigger an investigation without directly violating patient privacy. I included contact information for 3 former staff members who had expressed willingness to speak if contacted by authorities. For James, I compiled evidence of his involvement with questionable antiquities and submitted it to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. The submission included documentation linking his legal advice to transactions later flagged by international authorities for potential connections to looted artifacts. I also forwarded relevant information to the FBI's art crime team, focusing on the Anderson collection that had been the catalyst for our family rupture. Olivia's deception required a different approach. I submitted a detailed complaint to the Federal Trade Commission regarding her fraudulent endorsements and misleading claims, supplemented with documentation from brands she had falsely claimed as sponsors. I also reached out to a journalist known for covering social media ethics violations, providing enough information to start an investigation without appearing vindictive. The most complicated task involved the family heirlooms. Many had already been sold to private collectors who had purchased them in good faith. Rather than attempting recovery, I focused on documentation, creating a comprehensive digital archive, proving their provenance and their legal designation for museum donation. This record would ensure that when the pieces eventually resurfaced for authentication or resale, their true status would be known. As a final step, I composed a careful email to extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, explaining in measured terms what had occurred. I avoided accusatory language, simply stating that I had discovered concerning information about certain family activities and had felt ethically obligated to report it to appropriate authorities. I expressed regret for any distress this might cause, but affirmed my commitment to honesty and integrity. The Bennett name has long been associated with excellence and achievement. I wrote in conclusion, I believe maintaining that legacy requires acknowledging and correcting wrongs, not concealing them. I understand. Some of you may choose to distance yourselves from me as a result of my actions, and I respect that choice. I remain open to conversation with anyone who wishes to understand my perspective. I sent the last email shortly after noon, then closed my laptop. An overwhelming fatigue washed over me, not just physical exhaustion from the weeks of investigation and worry, but a bone-deep emotional weariness. I had spent my entire life striving to be worthy of the Bennett name, only to discover that the name itself had become a facade, hiding corruption and deceit. Yet, alongside the fatigue was something unexpected peace. For the first time in memory, I wasn't calculating how my actions would be perceived by my family, wasn't bracing for subtle criticism, or dismissal, wasn't contorting myself to fit impossible expectations. I had chosen truth over loyalty, ethics over family integrity, over acceptance. The cost was enormous. I had effectively orphaned myself, severed connections to my entire support system, and potentially damaged my professional reputation through association. Yet the alternative, continuing as a reluctant accomplice to my family's corruption, was simply unthinkable now that I understood the full scope of their activities. The professional fallout began almost immediately. My director called me into her office the following morning, her expression grave. "Lorelei, we've received some. Concerning communications regarding your family situation," she began. "Carefully. Normally, personal matters wouldn't affect your position here, but allegations involving authentication processes require our attention." I had anticipated this. I understand completely. I'd be happy to take a leave of absence while any concerns are investigated. Her surprise at my calm response was evident. "That might be best. This is awkward given your excellent work here, but no explanation needed," I assured her. "The museum's reputation must be protected. I've prepared a detailed document addressing any potential conflicts of interest in my authentication work, with full transparency about my processes and decisions." I handed her the folder I'd prepared, another benefit of anticipating my family's tactics. The weeks that followed brought a cascade of consequences. My father's hospital privileges were suspended pending investigation. James received formal notification of an ethics inquiry from the Bar Association. Olivia's social media accounts hemorrhaged followers as rumors of fraud spread. My mother, as always, focused on social damage control, but found her usual tactics ineffective against documentation and facts. Longtime family friends began to distance themselves. Charity boards requested her resignation, and the carefully cultivated Bennett's social prominence began its inevitable decline. I observed these developments from a distance, having moved temporarily to a small apartment in a different part of the city. My leave of absence from the museum provided time for reflection and unexpectedly for building new connections. Colleagues I'd kept at professional distance reached out with surprising support. Distant relatives I barely knew sent messages of encouragement. Even Aunt Philippa, long ostracized from family gatherings, invited me to dinner and shared stories about my grandparents that contradicted the official family narrative. "Your grandfather would be proud," she told me over dessert. "He believed in doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Before Richard took control of the family narrative, that's what the Bennett name truly stood for. Those words sustained me through the difficult months that followed. I had not destroyed the Bennett legacy, I had attempted to restore its true meaning. As the investigations progressed, I maintained my commitment to truth without vindictiveness. When authorities requested additional information, I provided it factually and without embellishment. When former family friends reached out to understand what had happened, I explained the situation without bitterness. And when distant cousins and relatives shared their own experiences of manipulation and exclusion by the immediate family, I listened with growing understanding of how widespread the dysfunction had been. 6 months after that fateful dinner, as the various investigations moved toward their conclusions, I received an unexpected email from my cousin Emma. "You should know they're selling the house," she wrote. Too many memories, Victoria says. But really, it's the mounting legal bills. Thought you might want a chance to collect anything meaningful before it's gone. I sat with that information for a long time, contemplating whether to respond. The Bennett family home had been the setting for every significant childhood memory: holidays, birthdays, achievements, disappointments. The thought of strangers living in those rooms felt disorienting, like losing an anchor point in my personal geography. Yet the house had also been the stage for decades of manipulation and pretense, the physical embodiment of the facade I'd finally seen through. Perhaps its loss was the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been unraveling for years before I discovered the first hidden document. After careful consideration, I replied with sincere thanks for the information, but no request to visit. Whatever I might want to reclaim from that house, photo albums, childhood mementos, family heirlooms would come with emotional entanglements I wasn't ready to navigate. The Bennett legacy I had come to understand wasn't contained in objects or properties or even the family name. It lived in choices, daily decisions, to pursue truth or comfort, integrity or advantage, authentic connection or strategic alliance. By that measure, perhaps I was upholding the true Bennett legacy after all, even as I stood apart from the family that had defined it for me. In choosing truth over deception, in refusing to participate in harm, regardless of personal cost, I had honored something more fundamental than family loyalty, the integrity that should have been the real Bennett inheritance all along. 6 months to the day after that fateful dinner, I stood in my newly reinstated office at the museum, organizing artifacts for an upcoming exhibition. The formal investigation into my professional conduct had found no evidence of impropriety. In fact, my meticulous documentation and strict adherence to authentication protocols had impressed the review committee. Miss Bennett approaches her responsibilities with exceptional diligence, the final report concluded. Her commitment to institutional ethics sets a standard for the entire department. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very qualities my family had dismissed as inconvenient stubbornness had ultimately preserved my professional reputation, while their compromises led to their downfall. And what a downfall it had been! My father's medical license had been suspended pending the outcome of multiple investigations. 3 former patients had filed malpractice suits once the initial allegations became public, and several more were likely to follow. His carefully constructed reputation as a surgical innovator had collapsed under scrutiny of his actual patient outcomes. James had been temporarily disbarred while the ethics committee conducted a thorough review of his practice. The preliminary findings were damning evidence of knowingly facilitating questionable art and antiquities transactions, helping clients circumvent international regulations, and potentially obstructing justice in previous investigations. His prestigious firm had asked him to resign to distance themselves from the scandal. Olivia's influencer empire had imploded spectacularly. The FTC investigation into her fraudulent endorsements had triggered a cascade of revelations about purchased engagement, fake sponsorships, and misrepresentations about her lifestyle. Former brand partners had filed civil suits seeking damages for association with her increasingly toxic personal brand. Her millions of followers had dwindled to thousands, many staying only to witness the ongoing train wreck of her public persona. My mother had perhaps suffered the most acute pain given her investment in social standing. Dropped from charity boards, excluded from social events, whispered about in the circles she'd once commanded, her carefully constructed world had collapsed entirely. The pending sale of our family home represented a final surrender of the facade she'd maintained for decades. I took no pleasure in these developments. Despite everything, these were people I had loved, had sought approval from, had shared history with. Their pain couldn't be separated from my own complicated grief for the family I had thought we were, or could have been. My phone chimed with a notification. Emma, always my connection to family news, had sent a link to a Boston Globe article. Bennett medical scandal exposes wider network of healthcare fraud. The investigation into my father had uncovered connections to a larger scheme involving multiple doctors, hospital administrators, and insurance companies. What began as one surgeon's ethical compromises had revealed systemic problems affecting patient care across several prestigious institutions. Similar ripple effects had emerged from the investigations into James and Olivia. James's legal maneuvering had helped conceal an international network of antiquities trafficking that authorities had been tracking for years. Olivia's influencer fraud had opened a window into widespread deception in social media marketing that was now receiving regulatory attention. The consequences of my actions had extended far beyond my immediate family, bringing accountability to systems that had long operated in ethical gray areas. This unexpected outcome had gradually reshaped my understanding of what I had done. What began as a personal stand against family betrayal had become something more significant, a domino that triggered long overdue reckonings in multiple fields. This perspective helped balance the profound sense of loss I still carried. I had not just lost my immediate family, but an entire identity built around the Bennett name and legacy. Holidays, once elaborate productions at my parents' home, were now quiet affairs spent with new friends or distant relatives who had reached out in the aftermath. Family traditions and inside jokes had no one to share them with. The unspoken understanding that comes from shared history had disappeared from my life. Yet new connections had formed in unexpected places. Museum colleagues once kept at professional distance had become genuine friends. Distant relatives like Aunt Philippa had re-entered my life, bringing alternative perspectives on family history that helped me understand how the dysfunction had developed over generations. Most surprisingly, I had received messages of gratitude from unexpected sources. Former patients of my father who had suffered complications but had been made to feel their concerns were invalid. Junior associates at James's firm who had been pressured to participate in questionable practices. Aspiring influencers who had felt inadequate comparing themselves to Olivia's fraudulent metrics. "You made me realize I wasn't crazy for questioning what happened," wrote one of my father's former patients. "Knowing the truth has helped me finally heal." These messages confirmed what I had come to believe during the most difficult moments of the past 6 months. Truth, however, painful, ultimately serves healing better than the most comforting deception. A knock at my office door interrupted my reflection. My director stood in the doorway, her expression warm. "The board was impressed with your proposal for the new authentication protocols," she said. "They've approved the implementation and would like you to lead the training initiative." The protocols I developed, inspired by the vulnerabilities I'd identified through my family's attempts to circumvent proper procedures, would make our authentication process more transparent and resistant to manipulation. "I'm honored," I replied sincerely. "When do they want to begin?" "Next month." "And there's something else." She hesitated briefly. "The Smithsonian has inquired about your interest in consulting on their authentication reform. Apparently, our situation has prompted several major institutions to review their procedures." I felt a surge of emotion, not pride exactly, but a profound sense of purpose. From the ashes of my family relationships, something constructive was emerging. The painful knowledge I'd gained was being transformed into systemic improvement. Later that evening, as I walked home through the autumn-painted streets of Cambridge, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The family that had shaped my entire identity had effectively ceased to exist. The Bennett name, once a source of pride and pressure, now carried complications I was still learning to navigate. Yet I found myself more at peace than I had been in years. The constant anxiety of measuring up to Bennett's standards had disappeared, replaced by the simpler challenge of living according to my own values. The painful clarity I'd achieved about my family had illuminated other areas of my life, helping me recognize and release unhealthy patterns I'd unconsciously adopted. I paused at a small neighborhood park, taking a seat on a bench to watch the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined my life as it was now professionally respected, but personally restructured mourning losses while discovering unexpected gains. The Bennett family legacy I had been raised to uphold had proven hollow, but in its place I was building something authentic. Not a facade of perfection, but a genuine commitment to integrity. Not a network based on mutual advantage, but connections founded on shared values. Not power derived from manipulation, but influence earned through principled action. My phone chimed with a text from a new friend inviting me to dinner. As I typed my reply, I realized I was smiling, a simple, uncomplicated expression of genuine feeling, not the calculated social smile I'd perfected at countless Bennett gatherings. The biggest disgrace to the Bennett family had become perhaps its most authentic member. In losing everything I had been raised to value, I had discovered what was truly worth preserving, not appearances or advantages or affiliations, but the fundamental integrity that allows us to face ourselves in the mirror each morning, without flinching. And that I now understood was a legacy worth building. Before I go, I want to thank each of you for joining me on this journey of family betrayal and personal redemption. Have you ever had to stand up for your principles against people you love? How did you handle that impossible choice between family loyalty and personal integrity? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of karma and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and the courage to choose truth even when it costs you everything. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand in their truth today. Until next time, remember that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to finding what you truly need.